Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, covering for Darren Hybe. We thank you for joining us. If you are asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. The Museum of Jewish Heritage is dedicated to educating a diverse audience about Jewish life across the Holocaust and beyond. Their new exhibit, Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, honors a remarkable episode of mass resistance from 80 years ago. Through archival materials, photos, recordings, testimonials, and artifacts, the exhibit recounts the extraordinary story of 7,000 refugees and the support they received from Danish and Swedish communities, showcasing one of the most effective acts in resistance in modern history. Joining us now is the president and CEO of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, Jack Kliger. Jack, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kibin. Very nice to speak to you.
Same here. Now, the Courage to Act Rescue in Denmark exhibition explores the incredible story of the Danish rescue during the Holocaust. Can you provide a brief overview of this exhibition and its significance?
Sure. Denmark in 1940 was invaded and occupied by Germany and was able to operate as its own government under the king as long as they abided by the rules that the Germans put into place, particularly about not making war on them and providing them with all their raw materials and things that Denmark could provide. What happened was that as part of that deal or part of that agreement, the Danish Jewish population of roughly 8,000 was not separated, segregated, or deported, which was unique. But by 1943, the situation had gotten more confrontational, and there was a significant Danish resistance in August of 1943. And that's when the Germans decided that they would go into a more aggressive action and were preparing to deport the entire Danish Jewish population. Word leaked out that this was going to happen, and the Jewish community, along with the resistance community, a tremendous number of segments of the Danish society, including the church, were very involved in a collective action to evacuate and rescue the Danish Jewish population from Denmark. And in the course of 30 days in October of 1943, a massive effort combining police, fire people, government officials, doctors, ordinary citizens, and especially the Danish fishing fleet coordinated to evacuate 95% of the Danish Jewish population to neutral Sweden, which had expressed a willingness to accept them. And they did this in the course, as I said, of 30 days. And almost none of them were captured. And so that population was moved and survived the war. So it's one of the great stories of collective action and mutual aid in history, and it's not that well known. So we, the institution of the Museum of Jewish Heritage, had been donated, were given from the government of Denmark a while ago, one of the few remaining rescue boats that was in the operation. It's called the Gerda 3, and they donated it to us, and it's still the only Danish rescue boat still afloat in North America. It's housed up at the Mystic Seaport where it's maintained. But from that boat and that story, we decided that we wanted to make an exhibition that told the story of what people could do, not what so many people did not do. And it was also a story of collective action as well as individual action. And we especially decided we wanted to do a storyline that explained history to a younger group than we traditionally had worked with. We always usually have high school students, ages 13 to 15, coming through our exhibitions. But in this case, we created an exhibition that was able to be viewed by those as young as 9. So it's for those 9 and above rather than those 13 and above. And so we've been planning it for quite a while. We think it's an inspirational story, and we did it not only with proper scholarship and research, but we also incorporated the input of a lot of young kids into the making of the exhibition. So we had a children's advisory board.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned this because, as you mentioned, it's a story that not too many people have heard about. And I also think it's amazing that you're, because it's not something that's heard about often, you're letting younger audiences as young as 9 learn about this. How do you kind of, I guess, process the material or like make it something that young children could ingest? Because I know this is like a very heavy topic. So,
Yeah,
how do you guys do that and so that they can learn, but it's not too overwhelming?
yes, we incorporated a couple of different techniques. One, we used holographic images of young people telling the story. We created 3 composite characters based on real life characters, one teenager, 2 teenagers, and a 9-year-old, 10-year-old boy. And we had the scripts prepared through their storylines, and we filmed them, and we even had children review the script. So we made it, we think, very children friendly but explainable. And we also designed the exhibit considering children's height, their sight lines, their ability to interact, and the scripts. And then what we did was we hired an artist specifically who is an artist for young children who had recently done a book about Anne Frank with new illustrations. So we think our illustrations, our holographics, our scripts, and our actual techniques are very friendly for 9 to 12-year-olds. And so far, the response has been very positive in that sense. But we made it something that even if they bring their parents can understand it. But it really is storyline and descriptions that are specifically very workable for 9 to 12-year-olds.
Now, how does the exhibition showcase the bravery and resilience of the Danish and Swedish communities who played a crucial role in saving thousands of lives? And as mentioned, we don't often hear about these communities when we talk about the Holocaust or learn more about it. So, can you tell us a little bit or expand a little bit more on that?
Yes, in addition to our 3 composite characters, we take 5 real life characters who participated in the rescue, and we take verbatims from them, their actual testimonies, but also tell the story of how they participated. They were both Jewish and non-Jewish participants, and the heroine, one of the key heroines, is the woman named Henny Sindig, a real life character, who helped do the rescues on Gerda 3 and who was very familiar with the waterways because her father was the head of the Danish buoy and lighthouse service. And she was a member of the resistance, and she organized the escape just in the month of October 1943 of over 300 people. And a lot of the storyline is told through the lens of her experience, her comments, and her descriptions. We also have many other people involved, but we do tell it as the story through the eyes of specific individuals who were there and who had experienced that and who are our narrators in effect.
Now, the interactive nature of the exhibition incorporates archival materials, photographs, recordings, and testimonials, which all sound very engaging. And I could imagine that whenever we're, just learning about history, making it a little bit more engaging is like a great way for people to learn and for the information to stick, especially with younger audiences. How do these elements come together to create a meaningful and immersive experience for visitors?
Well, there are about there are 8 rooms altogether that you go through. In at least half of the rooms are interactive elements like holographic images of one of our 3 composite characters who describe separate parts of the actions from their perspective, from the lens of a 9-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old. Then, in addition, there are elements within the rooms where people get to actually pick up the phone and talk to one of the rescuers, or they ring a bell and one of the resistance fighters opens up and describes what was being done. So it's like live narrators describing the events. And then probably the most impactful room is the room where we do a replica of the boat mounted on the wall, 30 feet long, and we show a film alongside of it that describes the whole process of how people were smuggled out at night, waited to get on the boat, had to make a very difficult crossing, were often boarded by German patrol boats and wound up getting to safety in Sweden. And it takes people through the journey from a video projection perspective and makes them actually feel almost like they're on the boat, even if they're not.
Now, the Danish rescue is a powerful testament to collective action during a time of injustice. How does this historical event relate to a broader theme of social justice, and what lessons can we draw from it in addressing contemporary issues?
Well, we took a lot of time in trying to figure out the name of the exhibit, and we came upon the name The Courage to Act. And we feel it's very important for people, even as young as 9, to understand that while it's important to have remembrance and to do acts of remembrance, it's very important to stand up and do the right thing and remember to act. And that's the formative phrase is Henny Sindig said, it was the right thing to do, so we did it. And we bring that throughout the exhibit. And we also end the exhibit with a line from the Torah that says, if you save one life, you help save the world. So we think we give lessons that it's not only enough to understand history, but to stand up when you see injustice, to be an upstander and not a bystander. And so we think this is a very important lesson that this exhibit underscores.
Now, can you tell us more about the accessibility initiatives and how the museum aims to make this important exhibition available to diverse audiences?
Sure. The majority of our, first of all, in terms of accessibility, we are obviously ADA compliant. Because of the nature of many of our visitors over the years, we are very good with access and audio assistance and those elements. But in addition, we think that the majority of our visitors to the exhibit, the majority of our student visitors are non-Jewish visitors. And we think that's very important because this is a universal lesson that should be learned. It was very important in the story to emphasize that the Danish church, which is Lutheran, was very engaged in this rescue effort. The Bishop of Denmark, based in Copenhagen, wrote a letter that objected to the Germans' plans to separate and deport the Jews. That letter was then taken by religious students to 95% of the Danish churches and read aloud on that Sunday. And the members of the Danish Lutheran Church were very involved in this rescue. So I think it's a universal lesson of standing up for your fellow man. The Danes didn't consider the people who they were rescuing Jews first and Danes second. They felt they were all Danes and they had to help their fellow man. That's a very valuable lesson.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because with the current prevalence of issues related to discrimination and hate, how does the Courage to Act address the critical need to reach younger generations and inspire them to be agents of positive change in their communities?
Well, again, what we want is we want children to come away from this exhibit learning that there were people who did the right thing and stood up for their neighbors, and that you should know that you have to consider making moral judgments. And even at 9 years old, we think that's a valuable lesson to do. So we believe that we show not only by example, but by real storytelling what people could do. And in turn, we want younger people to discuss that. What's the right thing to do, and should you do the right thing, and how do you do the right thing? So we think we're onto um, a good track with this.
And, I'm curious, would you say this is also a great opportunity for, maybe parents who visit the museum with their children to kind of have this hard discussion? Because I know that a lot of times parents want to shield their children from kind of, being exposed to a world where, unfortunately, a lot of discrimination and hate happens. So can you talk about maybe how this could be a great conversation starter for a lot of families?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot, yes, because first of all, we want children to come there with their parents and even their grandparents. I'm a grandparent, and I would love to have my grandchild come through with me. She's unfortunately 5 years old, but the exhibit will probably be there then. But the reality is, there is no avoiding the issues that face the world. There's an overabundance of information, images, and everything that children can see and do see. And so there's no way of shielding people anymore. You just have to give them the lessons of how you think they should understand the world, and to start to understand what you want to do and how you want to live your life. You really have to understand history, because there's so much ignorance of history that we think that putting out good information is what we can do to fight bad information. And the fact is, there's a lot of that out there, but you cannot avoid it. You must face it.
Now, beyond the exhibition, what other educational initiatives and programs does the Museum of Jewish Heritage undertake to preserve and share the history of Jewish life before, during, and after the Holocaust?
Well, we have created a lot of programs to take students through the exhibits about the Holocaust, high school students. And now what we're doing is we're training younger people, college students and college graduates, to be the educators. We always used to have gallery educators who were docents, but we think peer-to-peer education now becomes more important. So we've created something called the HESP program, Holocaust Educator Student Program, in which 20 and 22-year-olds, young people who are in college or just out of college, get trained on how to teach about the Holocaust and then go into local school communities. And each person that we have trained in HESP has taught over 500 students a semester. So we think that's a very good plan to do. We want peer-to-peer education on this important chapter of history.
Where can people go to learn more, or how they can interact with this exhibit?
Well, they can learn more by coming on our website. We have a lot of information about it. And then they can come down to see the exhibit. We're open on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Sunday, and we are anxious to have people come view it. But go on our website, mjhnyc.org, and it'll tell you an awful lot about it.
All right, well, Jack, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this really important discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Kibin. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here. We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
Welcome back. Established in 1844 by concerned citizens and officially empowered by the state to conduct oversight of its prisons in 1846, CANY stands as one of the nation's pioneering organizations tasked with administering civilian supervision of correctional facilities. Joining us now is the Executive Director of Correctional Association of New York, Jennifer Scaife. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
Now, I want to also ask, is it CANY or Canny?
We say canny.
Canny? Okay, great. So can you just tell us a little bit more about Canny and its mission in your own words?
Sure. So the Correctional Association of New York, canny, is an independent organization that has authority under state law to provide oversight of state prisons. And that means that we have access to some of the most the least transparent and most isolated institutions in our society. And we bring groups of up to 12 people into these facilities to meet with administrators of the prison, employees who provide programs, medical care, mental health treatment, and we conduct a lot of interviews with incarcerated people themselves to understand what's going on, what's going well, and where there are areas that need public scrutiny, greater attention, and significant improvement.
Now, I touched on it briefly as I introduced this segment, but can you, talk a little bit further about the historical context behind Canny's founding and its early role in advocating for prison reform in New York State?
Well, Canny was actually founded as the Prison Association of New York, and in 1844 and in the second half of the 19th century, mass incarceration as we know it today did not exist. And there were different kinds of problems. So the members of the organization were concerned about issues such as hard labor and corporal punishment and the lack of opportunities for people coming home following a sentence. Some of these concerns remain our concerns today. The organization, though, going back over the last 175 plus years, has had a role in abolishing the death penalty in New York State, setting up the probation and parole system, and in more contemporary modern times, advocating for legislation that prohibits shackling during childbirth, for example, and restricting the use of long-term solitary confinement. So the organization has had a significant role in many of the reforms of the correction system as we know it today.
Now, in 2021, legislation was passed to codify Canny's authority to visit, access, inspect, and report on state prisons. How has this legislative change enhanced Canny's ability to fulfill its mission?
It was a very important legislative event in our history. While we always had legal authority, well, I should say since 1846, 2 years after our founding, the law did not specify some of the powers that we now have. And among them are that we provide the state prison agency, the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, 72 hours notice prior to conducting a monitoring visit. Previously, we did not have the authority to provide this short a notice. We had to arrange for a monitoring visit with the department 30 days in advance. Another provision of the new legislation guarantees our ability to carry out confidential conversations with incarcerated people and employees. And that's significant because it's really important to be able to hear without of earshot of a prison administrator what somebody's experience is, whether they're incarcerated at a given facility or whether they work there. And then another provision of the law, among others, guaranteed our ability to send surveys in to incarcerated people to gather information at a large scale about their experiences, their attitudes, and the things that they think could be improved about their time in custody.
Now, Kenny has been instrumental in advocating for changes in prison policies and practices, including limiting the use of solitary confinement. I want to learn a little bit more about that, but could you just also elaborate on some of the recent initiatives and reforms that Kenny has been involved in?
So the organization over its history has had kind of a number of different roles. In the early part of the 20th century, it was very involved in providing reentry services, for example. And then under leadership in the latter part of the 20th century, became very involved in legislative campaigns to reform sentencing practices, for example. The Rockefeller drug law reform was one of the initiatives that Kenny had a key role in advocating for. Currently, our role is more focused on conducting the oversight of prisons, which is, in the case of HALT, the legislation that you mentioned, that involves our going into the facilities and observing the conditions in solitary confinement units, in residential rehabilitation units, which is a new kind of unit created by the law. And then understanding by talking to staff, by talking to incarcerated people, and then by examining administrative data from the agency itself, what is happening in terms of the sea change that the HALT law promised in terms of the way that the prison manages misbehavior and isolation. And what are the gaps between the letter and the spirit of the law and the actual implementation of it? So while our recent monitoring activities have not focused on the reforming those practices so much as informing the public about what is going on so that policymakers, advocates, lawyers, family members, and members of the government are able to access information. We have played a significant role in our history in the legislative advocacy that has led to these reforms.
Now, I think that kind of leads into my next question, basically, where transparency and accountability are core values of Canny. Can you explain how Canny's monitoring and reporting processes contribute to these values with the criminal justice system?
Thank you for asking that question. We, as you said, transparency and accountability are the core values of Canny and of oversight, I'd say more broadly. As I mentioned at the beginning, prisons are among the least transparent, least accessible institutions, public institutions in our society. And the people who are incarcerated in them are among the most disenfranchised people in our society. And so the fact that we are able to go in and carry out conversations with currently incarcerated people and carry out what they say, we are able to cast our eyes on physical conditions, the environmental conditions, the program areas, the clinical spaces where people receive treatment, and then report to the public and policymakers and advocates about what we're seeing, represents an extremely rare and precious component of the criminal justice reform ecosystem in New York. And we believe and know that it is only armed with the information about what's going on that these various actors that I mentioned are then able to help bring about accountability, whether that means providing additional care that we know work and that incarcerated people want better access to, or if it means holding the agency accountable for not fully implementing the law in the case of a new legislative initiative.
Now, I really want to talk about Canny's value, basically where anti-racism comes in. I think that over the past few years, as people started to learn a little bit more just about the criminal justice system, it's hard to ignore the racial aspect of it. And I think that it's great that your organization is kind of acknowledging that this is an issue. Basically saying that they're against racism or, anti-racist. Can you just talk about how your organization addresses racial disparities within the criminal justice system and what steps are taken to promote racial equity in your work?
Mm-hmm. So prisons are at the end of a long line of decisions that are made across a number of different disparate points in the criminal justice system, starting with arrest, through prosecution, sentencing, and then all the way through to parole, release, and reentry. But we also know that the disparities in that system did not start at arrest. They start with disparate access to high quality healthcare and mental health treatment, disparate access to affordable, safe, healthy housing, disparate access to good schools, and so on. And these are systemic structures and policies that have evolved in our country along with our country's legacy of racial oppression and slavery. And so the disparities and racial inequity that we see showing up in prisons in New York State echo systems that are at play throughout our society, and in some cases serve to reinforce those disparities and exacerbate them. So, for example, the New York State Inspector General last fall released a report following a years-long investigation that found that Black people in prison are disproportionately sanctioned for misbehavior and punished when compared to their white counterparts in prison. And so this is another government entity, an investigation that the state of New York has presented as a challenge that the prison system faces, not just in disparities that they inherit from decisions that are happening earlier in the criminal justice process, but disparities that they are reproducing and reinforcing in their own enforcement of prison rules.
Now,
So,
I'm sorry, you can continue.
well, so I just want to say that one of the ways that that we address these issues in our monitoring is when we see systematic examples of disparities playing out, as we have recently, for example, at Marcy Correctional Facility, where many of the people that we interviewed reported that young Black men who wore their hair in a particular style of braids or dreads or cornrows, for example, were being systematically excluded from the mess hall line and effectively prevented from eating a meal. This is a finding that we surfaced in our report that's available on our website, and we cited the Inspector General's preceding investigation that found these disparities in the disciplinary process as a basis for asserting that these disparities likely are existing in other areas of prison operations, and they deserve our attention, our serious concern, and they deserve an appropriate response from the agency.
Now, Kenny envisions a future with transformed prison conditions that promote several things such as health, safety, and justice. I know it's a long way, there's a lot of work to be done, but can you just quickly explain, what that vision entails and how your organization plans to hopefully work towards that?
Mhm. So the role of oversight, as we've discussed, is really focused on shedding a light on the kind of darkest corners of the criminal justice system. And so our work does not directly bring about changes in the near term to the conditions that we observe. Most of the conditions that we observe require a systemic and, in some cases, societal uh, change of heart in terms of improving the inadequate and, in some cases, abusive practices that we witness. So, as you said, we have a long way to go to create facilities that are, I think, in full compliance with human rights and civil rights standards and standards of recovery and therapeutic change. So we think that through continuing to do the monitoring that we're doing, bringing information out to policymakers, advocates, activists, and giving people the kind of data and the qualitative kind of anecdotal evidence, the narrative, the personal histories that we hear will gradually bring about this change that we call for. It is an incremental process, and we work as a component of a much larger movement of advocates and practitioners who have different functions in our system. So many advocates call for an abolition of the systems that we are currently working within. We are focused on what's going on right now in the 44 facilities in New York State, the 30,000 people who are incarcerated in them, and the roughly 26,000 people who work in these facilities across the state, and think that there is ample opportunity for change and room for improvement in the meantime while our broader society grapples with these much tougher questions about racial equity, about violence, and access to the tools that people need in order to lead healthy and productive lives.
Well, Jennifer, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about a topic that's honestly very complex. And I think like you can have all the time in the world and there just still be so much to, touch on. So I appreciate you taking the time, just to talk to us a little bit about this.
Well, thanks for your interest, and I encourage anyone who wants to learn more to go to our website, which is correctionalassociation.org.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll be back right after this.
30 years of BronxNet, 4 years of modern Odyssey. Broadcasting stories that may inspire you, untold or underreported stories. BronxNet, your story is heard. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching Modern Odyssey on BronxNet.
Welcome back. Today is recognized nationally as the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance, dedicated to commemorating the lives lost to anti-transgender violence and raising awareness about the ongoing violence affecting the transgender community. Destination Tomorrow is a grassroots agency committed to providing services for the LGBTQ community. They firmly believe that no individual should be compelled to leave their neighborhood to access LGBTQ specific services. Here now joining me is the Chief Operating Officer of Destination Tomorrow, Alex Santiago. Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, as I mentioned, today is Transgender Day of Remembrance. Can you shed light on the significance of this day and why it's crucial to commemorate and remember those lost to anti-transgender violence?
Well, it's important because every life is sacred, and for your life to be taken just because of your gender expression is it's crazy. We live in a free country, or supposedly live in a free country, and people are being murdered because of who they are, and you know that's crazy.
Now, in the past few years, there has been a surge in legislation restricting gender affirming care and other critical healthcare treatments for trans youth. How does this contribute to a climate of violence against the transgender community, and what can individuals and policymakers do to counteract these trends?
Well, Destination Tomorrow has an office in Atlanta, and we were one of the states where the legislation was passed. And just from being in the community, we've seen a surge, not necessarily of people being murdered because of the translation, but a rise in suicide. So it's very, very important that legislation is not passed when it comes to restricted gender affirming care. These are people's lives at stake, and to tell a kid who knows who he is or who she is that um, your government doesn't approve of this, so we're gonna strip that right from you. At the ages that they are, they don't understand that, and like I said, there's been a surge in suicide. So I believe that our community needs to come together, and we need to rally. We need to go to the state capitals in these different cities and show them, that we're serious about protecting our youth.
Now, you said something that I thought was really important, and it may, like, I know initially we talked about how, the violence and how, how sometimes people are murdered, but violence doesn't always have to look a certain way. Can you talk about, the importance of recognizing the different types of violence and how it's been affecting this community?
Yes, I believe there also has been a surge in drug overdose as well, and I believe that that's an act of violence, because to not be able to live your authentic life and not having a support system, a lot of times people go to drugs. That's their way of coping with the depression and with not understanding why they're not being accepted. So to me, that's violent. um, Suicide, someone who's not able to feel free and live in peace because of who they are, and then they're not able to cope. That's violence. So you're right. It's not just someone putting a gun to someone's head or someone stabbing someone.
Now, with the rise of anti-transgender legislation, how do you see, the mental health impact on, how do you see this, impact many transgender individuals and their mental health? And what role do community-based programs play in providing support during these challenging times?
It most definitely weighs on your mental health. I'm a trans man, and I remember when I first came out, like I wasn't accepted, by my family, and I suffered, depression. And I was fortunate enough at the time to have very good health insurance, and even though my family wasn't around to, to support me mentally, I did have a support system. And I don't know where I would be if I didn't have access to healthcare or access to those few, that supported me. So I think it's very, very important that organizations like Destination Tomorrow and other organizations in the community provide some type of support groups, mental health resources, mental health referrals, because sometimes we're all that these kids have.
Now, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I want to go a little bit deeper. And, can you just talk about how does your organization work with at-risk transgender individuals, and what impact have you seen on this community through your gender-affirming community building programs?
Well, I can tell you, at our Atlanta office, we have gender and name change clinics, and just to see these people come in, just to get something as simple as a what we may consider simple as a name change, and to see their reactions and to see the tears on their faces because they're able to actually have their ID match, their gender finally. It's things like that that Destination Tomorrow provides. In our Bronx office, we have support groups where the kids can come and is able to just dance and and have fun and be around other kids who identify the same way that they do. There's nothing to me more important than having someone that has your back, and these kids know that Destination Tomorrow has have their back.
Now, I love that you mentioned, just the idea of dancing and kind of being with community, because the Transgender Day of Remembrance, not only commemorates lives lost, but it celebrates resilience. And I think
Absolutely.
that a lot of the time when we're dealing with marginalized communities, we focus on pain, but there's also a space to kind of like focus on joy and, how coming together can build resilience. So, can you just share some inspiring stories of resilience within the transgender community that you've encountered through your work with Destination Tomorrow?
When I tell you every day that I'm in the New York office, someone comes through that door not knowing where they're gonna lay their head at night, not knowing when they're gonna get their next meal. And when they walk out of that door, they have a smile on their face, because we've provided a resource that they didn't have before. Um, and just they look at us as a family, not just providers. And I think that that's important too. Our CEO Sean has relationships with community in the Bronx where some of these kids even call him dad. So it's just amazing. I love working here. There's no other place I could be, or I would want to be, because just seeing the hope, on some of these kids' faces. Not even kids, sometimes we get people who decide to transition, late in life. And just to see them walk out of that door with hope on their face, it makes it worth it.
And I think that's so wonderful that you brought that up, because I think that there needs to be a spotlight on children, but there also is a spotlight on people who, unfortunately, maybe back in the day they didn't have these services, and it took them a little bit longer to come out and kind of live their lives authentically, as who they are. Can you just talk about how Destination Tomorrow has something for any stage or where you are on your journey to self-discovery?
Yes, we have youth groups. We have groups for trans women. We have groups for trans men. So it doesn't matter if you're 14 or if you're 55. We have something for you. We provide so many services in both of our locations that a lot of organizations who are in the same area, they don't provide. And I think that's why, Destination Tomorrow is home to a lot of people, because we don't care um, how old you are. We don't care your race. If you need help, we're going to be there.
Now, considering the emphasis on economic, social, and mental empowerment, can you share specific examples of programs or initiatives that Destination Tomorrow has, to implement and achieve these goals?
We have an amazing academic enrichment program led by Dr. Gloria Pope, where we provide GED classes, GED testing. We have a financial literacy program where you can learn about credit. We set you up with bank accounts through one of our partners at TD Bank. I mean, there's there's nothing that we can't provide for our community.
And I also want to like highlight that a little bit more, because I think for people outside of the community, These are things that a lot of people don't have to think about. For many people, just going to the bank is just,
Mhm.
another thing to do on their daily tasks. But, could you talk about how this may be a challenge for members in this community?
It's definitely a challenge, and I'll even give you one more challenge, and that's voter registration. When you don't have your ID doesn't match how you present, you're not comfortable, going into certain spaces, like going to register to vote or voting with your the name that you no longer use or the gender that you don't identify with. It's the same with walking in a bank. It's the same with the things that a lot of people take for granted. Catching a flight. I know one particular person who would drive everywhere that they would go because they did not feel comfortable going through TSA with their ID not matching their appearance. So that's one of the reasons why I believe that our gender marker and name change and gender marker clinic is very, very important because it gives people access to things that they didn't have access before simply because they didn't feel comfortable or safe.
Now, could you talk a little bit about, the importance of ensuring that, people have, programs like this in their neighborhood, especially like, a place like in the Bronx here in New York. Oftentimes, a lot of people have to go to the outer boroughs, to get some of these services. So, could you talk about the importance of having something like this in the Bronx?
Oh, it's very important because a lot of times people aren't going to go where they're not comfortable, and if the Bronx is home, then they would want resources home. And I believe, well, I don't believe, I know that's one of the reasons why Sean wanted to um, have our offices in the Bronx because there weren't any resources. There aren't any resources outside of Destination Tomorrow. And he doesn't feel like anybody should have to go outside of where they live to get resources. And that's why now, we're a one stop shop.
Now, I also want to highlight something that I think is super important. Not only is it in the Bronx, so people feel a little bit more comfortable because it's in their neighborhood, but the people that are part of Destination Tomorrow are also a part of the community. And I noticed that sometimes when we have organizations that are helping marginalized communities, sometimes the people helping don't look like the demographic that they're giving
Mhm.
assistance to. So can you talk
Right.
about, what your experiences has been like, working this organization where people can see themselves reflected in the people who work at Destination Tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that's another reason why we're so successful within our community because we have the Bronx, as you know, is very Latinx prominent. So we have several staff that speak Spanish. Um, we have staff that, like you said, live in the community. So they see them, in the grocery stores. They see them walking down the street. So it helps them feel safe. It makes them comfortable, because they feel like we're family, like I mentioned, before. So I think it's very important to be a by us for us type of community-based organization.
And how do you ensure that the voices of transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, especially those from marginalized communities, like as you mentioned, in neighborhoods that are predominantly Latino or some predominantly African American, how do we make sure that their voices are heard and representative in the initiatives that we support?
We have to, I believe at Destination Tomorrow we do that because we're always fighting for, the most marginalized of our community. You'll see a lot of organizations or a lot of allies fighting for the LGBTQ community, but the T is always silent. It's like a marginalized community within a marginalized community. So I believe, at Destination Tomorrow, that's why we focus so much on the trans community and making sure that their voices are heard and that they're seen.
Now, what are some ways that, larger organizations that, often may, stick to supporting LGBTQ communities during the month of June? What are some ways that they can do that so that it's not just in the month of June, but that this is like ongoing support and it kind of bridges that gap between one community to another?
Right. I think the month of June has become more of a marketing tool for these big companies because they know, it's Pride Month and they can get out there and they can have the rainbow flags on their buildings and, have the rainbow colored mugs at their shops. But to make a true impact, I believe that they need to be in community 365 days a year. They need to support the grassroots organizations who are on the ground fighting every single day for this community. They need to fund organizations that are giving the money back into the trans community instead of giving it to these larger organizations who are gatekeeping. I believe that's how they can help.
Now, I want to, kind of highlight what people can do within the community, within the LGBTQ community, because you mentioned that the T is often, a marginalized community within a marginalized community. So what can, people within the community and people outside of the community do to ensure that transgender individuals feel safe, whenever they're doing their daily tasks or whenever they're in their communities as well?
Not be a silent ally. A lot of times when it doesn't affect someone personally, then or they just see a story on the news and it doesn't have any effect on them, they don't do anything. But I feel like if you're a true ally, then you will speak up. You will walk the rallies, you will protest in front of the government buildings that are trying to pass these outrageous legislations. You have to stop being silent.
Well, we've had the pleasure to talk with Destination Tomorrow so many times, but for those who don't know, where can they go to learn more information about your organization and some of the resources that you provide?
Before we do that, can I say that um, we did a memorial slideshow to to commemorate to those that we've lost today,
Hmm.
and there are 36 names on this slideshow.
Wow.
That's crazy. And I just wanted to put that out there so you can see like this is real life for us every single day. And to create that slideshow with 36 human beings that were lost this year, it took a toll on us. So I just wanted to put that out there so people know that there are real people that we see every day and real people that we're losing every day.
And is,
So I was going to say, so to answer your question and to
mhm.
find out more about Destination Tomorrow, they can go to our website, which is www.destinationtomorrow.org. And it talks about all of our programs. It has our address, our phone number, for anyone who may need any assistance.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this really important conversation, and kind of highlighting, a lot of us may know or may hear it, but as you mentioned, it's not enough just to do it once in a while or in the month of June. So I truly appreciate you, taking the time to speak with us about this.
No problem. Thank you again for having me.
We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Kibin. Take care.